There are some serial killers. What makes them frightening isn't only the number of people they killed. What's truly frightening is that they can hide for years in the shadow of a state. Andrei Chikatilo, known as the Rostov Ripper, was exactly such a case. Because the Soviet order of the time did not want to admit that such a monster existed within its own system. And as a result of that denial, one of the darkest serial murder cases in Soviet history was growing. Andrei Chikatilo's childhood passed through poverty and the fear of hunger. The family often didn't have enough food. By his own account, he barely even saw bread properly until age 12. He said they ate grass and leaves to suppress hunger. Throughout his childhood, his mother repeatedly told him that he had an older brother named Stepan before he was born, and that when the boy was 4, neighbors starving from hunger abducted and ate him. How much of that story was true might never be fully known. But one thing was certain. The ideas of hunger, poverty, and cannibalism had been etched into his mind from childhood. In 1943, his mother gave birth to a girl named Tatiana. Since his father was at war at the time, it was clear the child was not his. Considering that during the war years, many Ukrainian women were sexually assaulted by German soldiers, Andrei Chikatilo had witnessed this sexual assault against his mother in the one-room hut where the family lived. But from the outside, he looked like an ordinary child who had come out of that darkness. He developed a strong interest in reading and memorizing. Because of his myopia, he tried to make up for what he struggled with in class by studying it again and again at home. Over time, he became a successful student, praised and appreciated by his teachers. He went to university, he married, he had children. In short, he seemed to have built a life no one would look at twice. The Rostov Ripper committed his first murder at the age of 48. He stabbed his victims repeatedly, used extreme violence to the point of mutilation, and in some victims, it was seen that the tongue had been severed, organs were missing, and horrific mutilations were left on the body. After that, he killed another little girl. A case file was opened, suspects were questioned, but the real perpetrator could not be found. Instead, someone else was blamed. He gave a statement under pressure. On paper, the state closed the case, yet the real killer was still out there. And a few years later, bodies began to be found in the wooded areas around Rostov, near train and bus lines. Not one, not two. A chain that lasted for years. Women, girls, boys. Each new body suggested the same invisible hand had struck again. In Andrei Chikatilo's case, there wasn't only the darkness of a killer. There was also a system that hid him. The Soviet order did not want to accept that such crimes could exist within its own society. Serial murder was a form of decay the official ideology did not want to see. That's why the police couldn't share everything openly. The press couldn't speak freely. The public couldn't fully learn what it was facing. This silence of the state bought the killer years and paved the way for further murders. After the number of murders increased, a Moscow police team was sent to Rostov to lead the investigation. While this investigation, called Operation Forest Road, was underway, the Rostov Ripper was noticed at a train station. There were traces of blood on his face and hands. The system could no longer ignore him. He was caught in the act. After 8 days of interrogation, Chikatilo began to talk. Not one murder, not 5, dozens. He confessed to a total of 55 murders. He even provided details precise enough to show police some bodies that had not been found before. Chikatilo's case did not proceed like an ordinary serial killer trial. He behaved erratically in the courtroom. Sometimes he shouted, sometimes made strange movements, sometimes tried to appear insane. Ultimately, he was found guilty of dozens of murders. He received the death penalty. The execution order was finalized years later, and in 1994, at the age of 58, he was executed with a single bullet to the back of the head. The innocent man, who had been accused years earlier for the serial killer's first victim, was exonerated after the Rostov Ripper's death. What makes the Andrei Chikatilo file chilling isn't only the number of murders. What makes this file different is that a monster could stay hidden for years because of state policy. The Soviet Union of that era did not want such a serial murder case to come to light openly, because it would bring not only the existence of a killer, but also the system's weakness, incompetence, and the questioning of power. That's why the truth wasn't spoken openly for a long time. Crimes were suppressed, investigations were delayed, and the darkness grew in the state's silence. Maybe this is exactly the most terrifying part of this story. Sometimes what feeds a serial killer isn't only the brutality inside him. Sometimes it's an order that doesn't want him to be exposed.